Hey everybody, welcome to Pealed Back's LiveCast Conversations with, as always, I'm your host Gene Bernier, and this is episode 59. Episode 59 is a little unique because this is being recorded on Monday, October the 4th. So you're watching the aftercast, I guess. Luckily, my good friend Seth Erickson has agreed to be on this episode. Seth's personality and particular brand of humor is the kind that draws people to him. He's a quick thinker with the ability to distill complex ideas into easy to understand information. He's not afraid to work hard and apply tenacity when needed. Seth uses storytelling as a way of helping businesses, specifically startups. Stats say 90% of all startups fail. Seth's vision is to reduce this disheartening number by at least 10%. He recognizes many startups excel at building their tech and ideas, but fall short when communicating their value to the world. Enter Seth, who teaches these budding business owners one of the most effective communication methods, an art form that has been part of humanity for as long as, well, humans been around. That's storytelling. Seth believes these entrepreneurs will find providing their value to investors and the marketplace easier with the techniques he teaches. He has seen firsthand how incorporating storytelling can make a presentation and a product stand out and become memorable to investors and customers alike. Seth, thank you so much for being the guest today.
Thank you.
And obviously, those words cannot do you half the justice of what you've got going on.
I was just thinking, man, we really need to cut that down. I was getting bored listening to you.
And I shrunk it down already.
I know, and I was like, I just was like, I wanted to start going like this while you were talking, like just whatever.
Just letting that creativity flow.
Yeah, I mean, I was already pumped up after your intro music. You couldn't see me. I was off screen, but
Oh, I could see you. I could see everything down below.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm dancing and everything too. That's the best part about the intro. It gets everybody warmed up.
Yeah, I like it. Good energy. So.
All right. Well, thanks for being on this episode and for jumping in when you were needed. You were actually supposed to be on episode 60, but we had some things go on, and you jumped up and decided number 59 is for you. So thank you.
I thought I was supposed to be on 69.
Well, that's we'll get you back on for that one.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Oh man, where should I start?
Start at the beginning.
Well, when a man loves a woman. No. So I guess a good introduction is a story that I've used a lot more recently because of what I do. But when I was in preschool, my mom went to pick me up from school, and the teacher met her at the door, and she automatically assumed that I had done something because I'm just that guy. I'm that kid, right? And the teacher meets her at the door, and she's basically like, your son did something that we've never seen any of the other children do. And again, my mom's thinking, oh, he did something really bad. There's no way that this ends well, right? And
he's an overachiever.
And so she basically explains, to my mom that they do this kind of exercise in preschool where they put up 3 panels and they ask the kids to describe what's happening in the 3 panels. And it would be, something like a rabbit and then a stick and then a bear, right? And the kids are just supposed to look at the picture and go, I see a rabbit, I see a stick, I see a bear. What I was doing was giving the rabbit a name, giving the rabbit a backstory, talking about what the rabbit and the bear were going to do later on, right? Like this is the stage when most kids are just supposed to be able to point at a color and say what the color is, or point at a shape, and say what the shape is. And I'm like world building, right? And they're just like, we've never seen this before. This is like,
oh wow,
really, unique, I guess is the nice way to put it.
special.
So from the beginning, I've always been a storyteller, and even in school, like I would, my teachers would write notes like, this was really creative, but your grammar sucks, and my paper would just be covered in red marks, and just like it had been stabbed to death. So I was always interested in that, but then as I got older, I got into drawing, and drawing took me into graphic design, which took me into web design. And I'd also gone to design school, so that kind of made sense. But I'd always had this impression of myself that I was a designer. And in 2015, a friend of mine said, "Dude, you're a storyteller. Like, you're good at design, but what you actually do, or what is really like part of who you are and your purpose, is storytelling." And I was like, "Great. How do you make money storytelling?" Right? Like, so he gave me this book called Story Wars by Jonas Sachs, and I read that book, and that guy was an agency owner, but he was also a storyteller, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I can make money doing this." But more so, I read the book and was like, "This is absolutely freaking fascinating." And after I read that book, I was like, "Well, I need to know more about the storytelling thing." So I literally was buying those 3 credit packs from Audible like a junkie. Like, Daddy needs another fix. Give me another. And so over the course of about a year, I read over 50 books on the topic. Everything from how to do storytelling for screenwriting, to writing a novel, to telling personal stories, to comedy writing. Just covering every aspect of it. And little by little, what I found was that there was some of the books talked about neuroscience. And I was like, "Ooh, I like neuroscience. Science is neat." So I started reading a bunch of research papers specifically on the topic of storytelling and the different facets of storytelling that were kind of connected. And so I read several hundred papers on the topic and learned that there's a whole slew of science that backs up all this stuff that, like, I think most people have kind of thought about stories or had an inkling. Anyway, you know what I mean? So I read all the scientific papers. They're super boring. Don't hurt yourself by doing that. It's a bad idea. But I, kind of then took a lot of that information and kind of started to formulate this idea of like, well, all these things, the way that the brain works and what we're seeing happening with the brain, it's like the brain is actually very similar to a computer, right? Like, we have short-term and long-term memory, just like we have RAM and a hard drive. We've got a conscious and a subconscious. That's kind of like your Windows and your DOS, or if you're a Mac person, it'd be your OS X and your Unix. But we have other things. We have firewalls, which we call bias, and basically through the research, I started realizing, well, the applications that run on the operating system are stories, right? That is what tends to get stored in your long-term memory and stick around for a long time. And I know that you talk about doing a lot of personal work and self-work, and I'm sure you've probably seen the concept of, the stories that you tell yourself kind of affect your outcome and what you're doing.
Oh, 100%.
So the work that I started doing, actually, it started crossing over a lot more into psychology. And I was like, well, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Like, I mean, there's stuff that I touch on, I've touched on in my education and understanding about it, but like, that's an even deeper hole. So that's where I started formulating this idea that, like, well, if your brain, has an operating system and it's running these apps that we call stories, then what is the method to write or rewrite those applications. There has to be a way, right? There has to be a way to code into the system. Well, that is storytelling. And when you understand how that works, and you understand that we all do it automatically, like breathing, but that if you become more effective at it, right, and you become, or you learn how to harness that better, then you will be better at communicating with other humans.
Right.
You'll connect with people on a deeper level. There's a lot of good stuff that happens there. So
well, it's a really interesting concept. Like talking about stories is like the app, right? Is where you can go download them, and then where some of them are going to be corrupt and are going to have some malware. You got to get rid of those, and
they get out of date. Yep.
And how do you like tell yourself those stories and identify when the subconscious is going, here's the story, and you're like, why does this one keep coming up? Be like, oh, I need to go fix this story.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you start to sit with that? And, I've read we haven't talked about this yet, but Seth has a book that's coming out pretty soon. But like one of the parts that ties into all this right off the bat is like you talked about in the book about like when somebody gets facts, it basically turns on 2 parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear a story, it turns on 7 parts of the brain. So it really, maybe talk a little bit about to how that works and how like just facts on their own, dry, boring facts don't stick, just like the research papers you were talking about, versus crafting a story out of all that research, which then will be like, oh, I'm going to remember how that felt.
Yeah. So the 2 parts of the brain that light up when you hear facts is basically your hearing, your audible sense, and then your language comprehension. So you hear something, and then you understand the words that you're hearing. That's why there's only 2 parts. What happens with a story when it's constructed well is that up to, like you were saying, up to 7 different parts will light up, and that's because we essentially, when we hear a good story, we start to run a simulation in our mind of that event, right? And so that comes with sight, sound, smell, hearing, feelings, right? Like all the language comprehension would be, one of those different things. And we've learned that because we can now hook people up to brain scans and test the stuff out and go, well, what the hell's really going on in that noodle of yours? So essentially when that happens, it works like a RAID server. Like, because more of your brain's being engaged, more of that that information is being essentially copied around. And this is why we have things like, oh, that song reminds me of a memory. That smell reminds me of a memory.
Right.
Oh, you just told me something that reminds me of a story. Right? Like, it's because it works like a RAID server, and it gets pushed in all these different areas, and then some areas will actually clear that information out. It'll move out of the short-term memory, but some other, depending on how that story affects you and whatnot, then it can move into long-term memory. So, and that's where you get an app. And that's how apps are born.
When the mommy RAID and the daddy RAID get together, and then all of a sudden, ta-da, code. Yeah,
and emotion, emotion is kind of like what makes that happen, right? Like, the memories that we tend to remember the most are the ones that are connected to the most emotion, right? Like, either something freaking fantastic happened to you and you're just like, I remember that so clearly, or something crazy bad happened to you, like getting in a car wreck or having a bad, getting beat up by a bully, or whatever. Like, it's
something horrible.
So that's kind of a little bit of the trick, right? Because like, you can tell stories and they're just not interesting, and then people don't even remember what you said. So
much like a bio I just read out.
Yes. I think that's the one.
That's a prime example of that, right? Well, it's interesting to hear that, because what you're saying is then that emotion is like the glue, and depending on how, if we've got emotions from 0 to 10, the higher you get, closer you get that emotion to a 10 about that story, is it just helps it bind it into your mind for longer.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, there has to be relatable elements, right? Like I use Star Wars as an example in the book, and it's like, you know what? We've all grown up and felt a little lost in the world and not known what to do. Maybe had an asshole father, you know, like maybe just maybe had a crush on your sister, you know, like things that we all experience, right? Like
lost a hand in a duel, just.
But those elements, there's some key themes in those elements in the storytelling that helps you connect with that character, right? Like there's the idea of family and the loss of family, right? Because Luke, you know, goes and leaves and he comes back and he finds that his family's been killed, right?
Yeah.
Like many people have lost loved ones, right? Like so that those emotional things are what starts to make that character. It's why so many people like Luke Skywalker, because they're like, I can understand these things because it's all part of the hero's journey. But yeah, it has to be relatable for you to kick in any kind of emotion, right? Like if I'm a soccer fan and you start telling me about the amazing football game you watched, I'm just like, okay, you know, like it does not matter to me, right? Like so there's certain things in storytelling that have to be kind of addressed, I guess.
Right. So it's a little bit about, so we've got the emotional part, we've got the relatability, which then kind of turns into this like sense of like unity. It's almost to be like, oh, he's like me, he's one of us. Like use your football analogy, be like somebody knows that you're a Green Bay Packers fan, and now all of a sudden you have this bond, and you're just like, wow, we're friends because we're like the same. Doesn't matter those other statuses that come into it. It's about how do you create those bonds and create that unity with the people or the audience that you're sharing your story with.
Yeah, it's it's pretty important. I mean, that, you know, like I was saying earlier, like you can create deeper connection with people when you tell a good story. But you know, it's like people do it in a hit and miss kind of a hit and miss kind of way. And so when you understand, oh, I need these ingredients, I need to hit on these elements in a story, then you can start to be more effective in it, right? Like you might tell a story to one group of people and they all think it's hilarious, and you tell that same story to somebody else and they're like, you're an idiot. Which happens to me like every day. So
so what you're saying is you kind of have to know your audience for the story that you're going to pull out.
Yes, that is definitely a key takeaway, right? Like you can tell the right story to the wrong people, and you can tell the wrong story to the right person, right? Like and fail both ways, right? Like storytelling, even though it does so much to the human brain and there's all this crazy neuroscience around what it does, like it's not exactly a magic bullet, right? Like that's something that I don't know if I said that enough in the book, but I feel like I probably should have said it more. Not to denigrate it, but you know, the audience is and understanding your audience is really key, right? Like I mean, they talk about that in like the startup world all the time, like, you know, doing your user research. Well, that's one piece of it, but like how you communicate with that user is the other piece. So
well, it's interesting to hear that. Oh my, I just lost my question. That usually doesn't happen. It was going to be a great question too.
I bet.
It was about the whole, you know, telling. So when people hear about modifying your story, depending on the audience, you know, one thing I want to kind of dive into a little bit about there is like some people can become chameleons or like think they need to be a different person in those different audiences. And maybe you're going to correct me right or wrong here, but like I don't think that's necessarily what's being said. It's about learning how to deliver your story while still being the full authentic you, depending on who you're in front of.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that point of view just in general anyway. Like, you know, I didn't write the book to be prim and proper, you know, to use like boring corporate speak. Like I use crazy analogies and tell jokes and swear and, you know, and all this stuff because that's who I am. But like, like no matter who you are, like the story should come from you, right? Like, and it really depends on what setting you're using a story in, right? Like you can tell a story to make all your friends laugh, or you could tell a story to convey, a really intense experience in your life. Um, but and they all have kind of different characteristics to them and how to craft them. So but yeah, I would say always be authentic. Like it's so much easier. It's so much easier to do that.
100%. It is like, it is incredible how much you don't have to manage when you're just like, I'm me no matter where I show up.
Yes. Yeah. And that I mean, that's something I've learned in my life too. Like I tried to change myself for a long time because I didn't, I was always like the rambunctious kid, and um, I would say crazy things and come up with crazy ideas, and I realized that other people around me didn't think the same way that I did, and over time it was like, well, maybe I should just keep my mouth shut, right? Like, and because
Yeah.
these people
Oh,
don't
yeah.
understand me, or I don't fit in with this group the way that I would like to, or whatever. And now I'm just like, fuck it, like. Like, sorry, you may have to bleep this out later, but
We don't
um,
believe it.
I just, yeah, what you said just a minute
Yeah.
ago, though, like it takes a ton of extra energy to not be yourself. That's
Oh,
the crazy part about it. It's like you're trying to do everything right. You're trying to make stuff work. You're trying to, fit in at your work, or make things work with your, your friends or your loved ones or whatever. And I just reached a point where I was like, no, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is how I talk, this is how I think. Like, so
and at this point, we need Hugh Jackman's "The Greatest Showman" song coming in about "This is who I am," right about now. And
uh,
that's what's blaring in my head, which is, I guess, a story about
I
that.
don't know, I don't watch musicals.
You've
I
never
hate
watched that
musicals.
before? What?
No.
Oh my god.
I when here's a story. When I was a child, so remember back in the days when we had VHS tapes, and
Yeah,
Disney had those like big, like the big VH. Damn it, where's my other hand? Here we
yeah,
go. Like they're like this big, and you'd open it up, and there's like that one cassette tape that's got like 4 inches of packaging going around the thing, and then
yeah.
you take it over, and you would have to push it in the slot, and then practically jump on the thing to push it down to go into this giant VCR. We had these things called VCRs back in the day, kids. Um, I watch movies like Jungle Book, or
Yeah.
um, I can't remember what else, like Alice in Wonderland. Any Disney movie that had singing in it, I would get up. We didn't have remotes, so I'd actually get up,
You'd have to go up and hit the fast
fast
forward button.
forward through the singing, because I was like, this is so boring. It's killing the story. Like at like 6 years old, I was doing this. Like yeah, I've never enjoyed musicals. I love music,
Yeah.
right? I love, obviously, but I don't love musicals. Like the only
Interesting.
musical that I ever went and saw was Avenue Q, and the only reason I like that musical is because it is so vulgar and inappropriate. That's it.
This is a wonderful tangent to go down. See, we can have differences and we're still friends. This is incredible. I didn't
Crazy.
think that this was going to work, but I thought we
Crazy.
had to end the show right away. But well, thank you for sharing that you don't like musical, and obviously the reference to the Hugh Jackman song fell on deaf ears. But
Yep. Just
long story short, be yourselves. So much easier, way less calories that you burn, or brain has to burn anyways.
mm-hmm.
You even talked about that in your book a little bit about why the brain holds on to different memories and stories, because holding on to an app takes up energy, and that's it's going to drain your battery if you have too many.
Yeah. I mean, the brain has to go through. Yeah, because the brain is always trying to conserve calories. Like it literally like has so many calories a day that it wants to use, right? And so, um, this is part of the reason why we get like procrastination and things like that. The brain's like, that's going to be hard to do. I don't want to burn those calories to do that thing. Right. And you have to be like, no, guess what? We are doing this thing. This is happening, people.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it, and so part of that is, like I said, the RAM, right? That's your short-term memory. Like there's lots of stuff that your brain can access quickly, but then over time it goes, okay, we don't need this information anymore. We're burning calories holding on to it, so we need to get rid of it. And yeah, I talk about that. Like, can you imagine what would happen to your brain, like if you could remember everything you did, like over the last month? I mean, every step you took, every breath you took, every thing you said, everything somebody else said, every experience you had, every feeling you had, like like your brain would just be mush, like, because it's just trying to hold on to all this stuff. So yeah, it has a cleaning process that it's going through, and like I said, it's exactly like RAM. So
it's a great analogy, and for all the geeks that are watching this, you're going to understand this really well. For those who aren't geeks, be like, versus, all right, trust me, it's how your computer and phone work.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit about, like, you hinted that there's some structures around what makes a great story. Care to share a few insights around that?
Yeah. So there's actually lots of structures for storytelling. I'll give you a few examples. So the shortest story you can tell is problem solution. That's it. That is technically a story, although it's very short, but it's very effective. Like we can go, I have a problem. Oh, do you have a headache? Yes, I have a headache. Here's some aspirin. Problem solution, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of businesses build their services based off of a simple story like that. The most common and most widely used story format is called the hero's journey. And the reason it's the most common and most widely used is because it is a repeating pattern, essentially, that we have seen across cultures, like all over the world. Everybody uses the same structure to tell a story. And so this crazy guy named Joseph Campbell built upon the work of several other anthropologists who started kind of putting the pieces together, going, there seems to be a pattern here. Like, like I can look in ancient China and see this type of story. I can look in Greece and see this type of story. I can look in Native American culture and see this type of story. I can look in India and see this same type of story. It's the same arc and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's called the hero's journey. It's actually also Star Wars is based on the hero's journey. I keep seeing the Star Trek back there, so I feel like I have to keep bringing up Star Wars, but I do like Star Trek. But
there's some Star Wars back there as well. We've got some.
I know, but it's so prominent. It's like sitting right over your shoulder. You're like, Star Trek.
Well, right above me, you see the Death Star.
Yes. So what was I going to say? Oh yeah. So George Lucas actually worked with Joseph Campbell, who wrote the story or the book, The Hero's Journey. And they worked together to create essentially the hero's journey through Star Wars. And that's why it's another reason why Star Wars is very popular. There's lots of different things that came together in that trilogy to make it what it is. But the reason the hero's journey is so widely used is because we, as humans, you and I, experience this every day. We go through ups and downs, right? Like that is, we hopefully learn from those ups and downs, and then we gain some sort of knowledge or wisdom or magic potion, which kind of is how Joseph Campbell talked about it. But you essentially through your trials, tribulations, struggles, you learn, you grow, you become better, and then you're like Prometheus bringing fire, from the gods, and now you help others through that process. And quite often, what happens in a lot of these stories is you have a mentor, right? And the mentor is the one who went on that same journey, and now they are towards the end of their life. So that's why we have, you've got Hamish in Hunger Games, right? You've got Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Lots of movies you'll see some type of mentor type person that steps into the hero's life and helps them to get better or overcome that challenge that they have. Well, funny enough, that's what businesses do. Anybody who creates a business, they create a business to solve a problem. That is,
they're the mentor. They're the Obi-Wans.
Right. And what a lot of businesses make the mistake of doing is trying to set themselves up as the hero in the hero's story. Right. So we are all heroes in our own journey. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so what we need is a mentor to step in and say, I can help you overcome this problem. Well, like in the startup industry, a lot of startups don't do that. They talk about the tech. They talk about how we got blockchain, we've got AI, we've got, crypto.
Well, they're going to the moon. Like you get on that blockchain train. I'm not ready to talk about blockchain. That's still wrong.
But the focus is on the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
If you are the mentor, then you need to understand the problem at a deep level, and you need to talk about that, right? Like, you know that people are experts in their field because they can talk about a problem at a deep level, right? Like people who are not experts are like, they'll ask you very surface level things, or they'll talk about a problem at a very surface level way. Or like I was saying, they won't talk about the problem at all. They'll talk about the technology that enables the solution. But that still doesn't tell the customer how it's gonna solve their problem. Like, I don't care if it has blockchain. I want to know if my problem is going to get fixed efficiently, effectively, and also, what are the positive outcomes of that. So anyway, so elements of a story, right? So well, let's back up a little bit. So I've talked about some different types of storytelling, but elements of a story are essentially, you need to know who your hero is, right? That's your customer. You need to know what they're looking for, what kind of transformation they want. You need to know who the villain is. What is the villain doing to the hero, right? Like, these are very basic things that you can start to kind of outline and go, okay, if I can tell the story this way, right? Like, people will start to kind of connect, because they'll be like, oh, you get what I'm going through, and I like that you get what I'm going through, and it seems like you have a solution. Maybe I should pay more attention to this, right? And then, you've got other things like, how do you position yourself as the mentor in the hero's story? Well, I've already kind of mentioned it, but you talk about the problem at a deep level. You don't just talk about it at a surface level. Most people confuse it and they go, oh, well, I need to show all my awards and all my, accolades and everything. And it's like, you don't need a ton of that to convince people if you can talk about the problem correctly. Like, and you've got to do a little bit of future pacing, right? To say, and here's what life looks like with our product or our service, and here's what it looks like without it. And and by talking about the problem, and then talking about it in a way that, like, people are like, yeah, these guys get what I'm going through. That creates the emotion. The emotion moves action forward, and just circling back to what we were talking about before.
Well, that's, like, you basically just drop down the marketing plan for everybody to be moving forward. If you're in a business and trying to serve people or sell your products, is like, I don't know, like that mentor concept, like literally, like, blew my mind. Like, I'm just like, oh, that is right. That is, like, it is 100% right. I hope everyone wrote that down and listened to the rest of this. Is like, dude, you just dropped some serious gems on how to, like, refigure that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And what I've been trying to tell people, most people are not doing. Like, I can look at something and immediately go, oh, this is all wrong. Like, I was looking at somebody shared a startup with me today, and they were very proud of the work they did with the startup. And I was like, well, let's see. You're not talking about the problem right off the rip, right? So, like, you're talking about how your solution is easy. Well, easy solutions don't create feelings, right? Unless there's a big problem, right? So start with the problem and then bring in your solution afterwards. But, like, you're just like saying, this is the easy XYZ tool. And I'm like, there's no emotion there. That doesn't move me towards any kind of action.
No.
But if you're like, don't you hate it when this thing happens or whatever, like it's kind of cheesy the way that I stated it, but there's much more effective ways to do that. But that's just kind of me going off the cuff.
Well, delivery all comes with it, but like if you're looking at it from like that concept of like I've got all the features and the features are what are going to win me the customers, be like, stop that right now. You've been a bad little entrepreneur, because that's no one can. Here's the secret: nobody gives a fuck about your features. Nobody. At the end of the day,
or your technology.
No, they don't care. They don't care how you're doing it. All they care about is, now I'm getting ranty, but all they care about is solving their problems. Mm-hmm. They don't need to know what you've done to it or all the revisions, or does it solve my problem? Does it make my life easier? Do I get a return on my investment because of dealing with you? Yes. Let's talk. If any of those are next.
Yeah. The thing that I like to say that goes totally in alignment with what you're saying is you need to answer the question in the client's mind of, which is this: why the fuck should I care?
Yeah.
Start there, right? Like if you can't answer that, then you're probably going to have problems anyway. But the point of using a storytelling kind of process or format is to build a relationship with your customer, right? Not just to sell them something, but to develop that relationship, develop that brand over time so that they want to continue to come back. Here's the kicker, and buy from you again. That crazy talk, right?
You get out of here. This is you're about to tell me that working with a client you've already built a relationship with is way easier than getting new ones all the time?
I know.
Seth, this is sacrilege, and I don't know what's going to happen to us. But they're going to chase us out of town with pitchforks for this kind of ideas.
That sounds fun.
That's a story in itself. That literally got chased over a bridge by
there was that time in Vegas, but
I had this really tall roommate. I don't know what was going on there.
Good
man
stuff.
This is like that's the type of conversations that get everything fired up. Like, make them care, or I guess it's not even like make them care. It's like learn how to like create the care in them, right? Or like identify that problem and see it as big as they do and go, hey, it's okay, we can help you.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, it's how you communicate that, right? Like, if you communicate an effective story better than my speaking, then that will start to draw people in, right? Because one of the things that I always say is like, I always see in marketing, like people just shouting at people for attention. And I'm like, but when somebody starts telling a story, like people give their attention, right? Like they're like, oh, that's interesting. Or I want to know more about, this or that or whatever. Right. And so it's a very different mechanism to connecting with people. And if you can connect with them, then they will start to care. Right. Yeah. And if you can answer that question of why the fuck should I care? That makes it a lot easier. But like you said, instead, so many companies are just like, we're award winning, we're cutting edge, we've got this technology, we're best in customer service. And it's like, well, I'm not saying that stuff's not important. I mean, that definitely helps build the case that maybe you're the right person to fix the problem, but that should not be front and center, right? That's kind of like icing on the cake. So
interesting. Yeah, no, it's that social proof is a big thing. But like, as I'm hearing you talk about building the relationships and telling the story, you could either be the marketer, which is like the comparison of like the big like shaky hand guy that's at the car dealership. Look at me. Or you could be a storyteller. You could be a Gary Vee style storyteller, or like you like it depends on what are they? Are they a customer or a client? And like the definition of a client is somebody that's in your protection. So that's a huge responsibility of a relationship to have. A customer is a transaction. So what are you looking for? Transactions or clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the other things that we help our clients focus on is what is your brand archetype, right? So so there's lots of different archetypes of or characters that you can be. You can be the rebel, you can be the magician, right? So understanding that also helps you tell your story, right? Like the way you tell your story is affected by understanding what the archetype of your brand is. And so I think that's another thing to point out, because if you're a rebel brand, right, you could tell a very similar story to another company, but in a completely different way, right? Because you're going to have that rebel tone of voice, that rebel thought process, right? And so that's another thing, is another tip I would say too is when you are using storytelling, don't just stop at telling a story, but pay attention to how you're communicating that story and if it's in alignment with your brand, right? I just see so much of the same corporate blah 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 stuff all around, and it's just there's no personality to it, and it's not interesting, and it doesn't really set you apart. So
it's just at the end of the day, people are going to buy from people, and it seems like relationships are back in fashion in business again. So people are going to be more excited about you as a person. Yeah, there's a brand tied to it, but the successful ones are they have an avatar of some kind that's out there front and center getting people excited. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's just what I'm seeing and not the full story, but it comes back to the stories I guess I'm telling myself too. As we're talking about this, I'm like, man, I think I'm going to have to phone Seth for some advice on telling the story about this a little bit better.
Yeah, I'll definitely be happy to help. So
it's what you do. Well, as I said, we were going to look up and be like, hey, it's 40 minutes. So we're 42 minutes into this, and these conversations are just going to keep going. I do want to be respectful of your time. Happy to keep talking a little bit longer, but I know it's late for you in Texas right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got some more questions, I can definitely try to answer a few more for you. But
you know what? We jumped right into this, and we didn't even talk about the Storify Agency or your book. So how about you tell us the story about your agency and then the book.
I'll just tell a short story about Storify Agency. So, I mean, essentially what we do is we work with startups to help them better communicate their value to the marketplace and to investors at large. And that's really, really needed, because, if you have a great product and you can't get anybody to buy it, or you can't get, any funding for it, then that's a problem, right? And so yeah, that's what we do. I mean, we've worked with over 100 startups now, and we've been able to help some different companies see some really interesting success during COVID-19, especially. So pretty proud of the work that we've been able to do there. But yeah, was there another question?
And as well, there's a book. Tell us about the book.
The book. Yeah. So the book is called How to Hack Humans. It's on pre-order for Amazon Kindle, and if you get it before October 15th, it's 99 cents. So the book isn't super long. It's about 2 to 2.5 hours to read the whole thing. I get straight to the point. I don't spend too much time fluffing my own nuts about what an amazing storyteller I am. I just jump right in. And fun fact about the book, I don't think I've ever seen anybody else do this. I created a playlist for or a soundtrack for the book. So each chapter has a song. Has a song that goes with it, and you can find those playlists on Spotify and YouTube. So
that is good. I was wondering about that, because you're reading it, I'm like, is this just a suggestion, or is this a take on a quote? Be like, now I get it. So now I'm gonna have to go listen to the song.
Well, it's clear that you didn't read the introduction, did you?
The
links are right there. Yeah. So the book is, it's like getting to spend 2 hours with me giving you a masterclass on storytelling, branding, and I cover a lot of other subjects. I actually added bonus chapters where I talk about mindset, what makes for a strong vision. And I tell my own personal story, but that's way at the end. So if you don't want to read it, you don't have to.
I'll get there eventually. 10 pages at a time.
That's right.
God bless 75 Hard.
Oh, and if you would like to download the first chapter of the book and learn more about it, if you go to Storify Agency.com, so Storify is STORIFY agency.com/livecast, you can.
Down
Gene's
there,
doing this. I think he's throwing gang symbols at me while I'm trying to tell you this. You can download the first chapter of the book free. It covers the first chapter, kind of talks about neuroscience. So it's kind of setting up like, this isn't a bunch of BS. This isn't just an opinion or something like this. This is what science is telling us about what storytelling does and how it interacts with the human brain. So that's a good starting point. So.
Love it. Great, man. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Before we wrap up, I have one last question that I ask every guest. So I've got a time machine. We're going to hop in it. We're going to go back 10 years. You get to give yourself one piece of advice. What would it be?
I think first I'd be like, fuck, what are you doing here? How did you travel through time? What happened to your hair? Oh my gosh. Then I think after I got over that, I would probably, like, for me, I mean, and since it's me, I'm going to give advice to myself, I guess. And it would be, to learn about storytelling a lot sooner. Like, it would have put me on my personal purpose and path in a much faster. It took a long time to get there. I like to say that I was a closet storyteller who was, living a double life as a designer, and just didn't realize, just wasn't really connecting with who I was, and now that I am, I'm moving the needle further for my clients than I ever did. Being a designer, and that to me makes me really happy. But so telling myself, like, 10 years in the past, things would be, even further along now. So.
Wonderful. Be storytellers ahead of time.
Yeah.
Well, brother, thank you so much for being on the show. To everybody else, thanks for watching another episode of LiveCast Conversations with. This is episode 59. And I want you to find one thing to get better at telling your story this week. Till then, we'll talk to you all later.